Now, gentlemen, may I put this to you first of all. Many Americans are obviously deeply concerned about their country's position in the world at this time and what their national purpose is. There's a war in Vietnam, the threat of racial war in their cities, and now international monetary difficulties affecting their economy. So we have the richest and most powerful country in the world, with many people in it apparently beginning to lose confidence in their ability to conquer their difficulties and perhaps even to hold the American democratic system together. Now, how do you see that?
Yes.
Christopher Mayhew.
Well, you've reminded me, when you mentioned Gladwin at the Security Council for the United Kingdom, you reminded me what an extraordinary change there is, of course, in the United States' prestige and situation in the world today. When I think back to those days, the job she did with the Marshall Plan against Stalinism, it was magnificent. She had the moral and political and economic leadership, really, of the world. And I sometimes think with the Americans, you know, they don't understand how well they've done. They're still in Vietnam today, for instance. They still seem to me to be hypnotized by the thought that they're being pinned down by this great black menace of communism. And we in Europe see quite a different picture. We see the west wind prevailing over the east wind in Europe. We see, as far as we're concerned, thanks largely to the Americans, that we have won the ideological war. And one of the things that strikes me today about the American attitude to their own mission is their, I think, undue depreciation of what they've done and their refusal to take a more relaxed view. If only they could relax a little bit, I think they might be able to handle these terrible problems of Vietnam and race a bit more successfully.
Isn't it a bit difficult to be relaxed when they get reports of so many casualties of their own troops in Vietnam and a bloody war, the end of which they cannot see?
Yes, but is it not a sign of excessive tension to have got so far in? You see, they've gone far too far in. When you look now with a fresh mind at their position in Southeast Asia, what are they gaining for the enormous sacrifices and courage that they're showing there? What are they gaining, and what is the world gaining from it? It seems perfectly plain to me that they've been led by this rather exaggerated picture of world communism into accepting a commitment and accepting sacrifices and weighing in far further than is in their interests or in the interests of the free world.
Enoch Powell.
Yes, I agree with Mayhew that the American position in Vietnam today rests upon a fundamental misconception, or at any rate a highly caricatured misconception of the layout of forces in the world, and in particular in Southeast Asia. One finds it difficult to see Southeast Asia as it seems to appear to a typical American policy. But I think this in turn goes back to the fundamental question and the fact of it being asked at all. What is the mission of the United States in the world? Now, it seems to me a pathological sign when a nation is asking itself, what is our mission in the world?
But haven't we been doing that, just that, in this country?
Well, if we have been doing it in recent years, it's a sign of our own malaise.
Yes.
Certainly a nation which is going places is not asking itself where it is going. It is living. And just as a man who takes his temperature from hour to hour is certainly ill, probably mentally ill if he isn't physically ill, a healthy man doesn't take his temperature. He knows it's all right. And it is a sign of malaise, certainly to us, because on the whole we are not an ideological nation, to find people saying, what is our mission in the world?
Lord Gladwin.
Well, I rather agree with Christopher Mayhew and Enoch Powell, generally speaking. I just come back from America. I had only a week there, but I did get a definite impression that the Americans as a whole were feeling pretty depressed and pretty lonely. Well, it's not only, I think, Vietnam that dominates everything to a certain extent. It's not only that. It's not only, I think, the race problem, which is becoming more acute. It's not only, I think, the dollar. It's, I think, in a way, it's more fundamental than that. I think it's a kind of crisis of confidence, more particularly among the younger generation, who don't quite know what it's all about, this industrialized society, and what their role in the future will have to be and what it's going to lead to. But I think that this is something which is affecting not only America, but also the other industrialized nations in the West, of course, but also perhaps even beyond the Iron Curtain. It's a kind of revolution, if you like, which is now going on, a kind of turmoil. And out of that, something's going to happen. I think, broadly speaking, if we come to present politics for a moment, it is obviously the Kennedy-McCarthy between them who represent this growing new force. The young people who don't want to just cogs in a machine anymore. They don't want to be organization men necessarily. They want to be something new in the world. They want to have a real role. They represent these tendencies, which is perhaps still in a minority in America, but will perhaps become a majority soon. And I think that the contest in the American presidential election may well be between these, so to speak, these vague new forces and the old forces of conservatism, of the American flag and hanging on at all costs and so on, which are represented by the president.
Well, are you worried about the future of the free world and this country if America is humiliated in Vietnam, and perhaps therefore the American people feel a very great reluctance ever again to take on foreign involvement and they withdraw to Fortress America?
Yes, I think one's bound to feel that if it does go all wrong in Vietnam, and if in fact they are defeated, then unquestionably not only will similar situations of potential guerrilla warfare and so on, the guerrillas, the Chinese and the Russians will be pushed also into this, will be to that extent encouraged. I think there's no question about that. But frankly, though it's no good jobbing backwards, of course the loss of prestige and the encouragement to the communists would be nothing like so great if the Americans hadn't launched out beyond, in my view, their political strength. And therefore really made inevitable this setback.
Do you have any views? Sorry, Mr. Powell?
Well, if that is true, and I agree with that analysis, then let's face it, the sooner a revision takes place, however painful, of the American strategy in Vietnam, the better. It's no use sitting and saying, here is a train which is rushing into an obstacle. How absolutely terrible. We just have to put the brake on as soon as possible, and the sooner it is put on, the less the impact of a collision is going to be.
And
I agree with Christopher that there is going to be an impact, even in the best conceivable case. Yeah. But the sooner that is recognized, and the sooner the brakes are put on and the retro parachutes are actuated, the less that inevitable reaction is going to be.
May I just add on this? You see, too, it is so important that all of history since the war shows that the more the relaxation, the less unity on the Marxist side. The less the crisis, the more disunity on the Marxist side. Marxism is a philosophy of conflict and crisis. And really, we've seen it so clearly in Europe that if you relax, they fall apart, and the west wind prevails over the east wind. Now, this is something terribly hard, I can feel, for the Americans to accept at the moment, but it's profoundly true.
Well, it's the technique of jiu-jitsu, I understand. You fall down so that your
That's right.
opponent falls over you and breaks his neck, or something like that. That's what you're more or less saying. I dare say it's the right thing to do in a general way. I think that we probably ought to start from the assumption that the Americans are just not going to be forced out of Vietnam just like that and be pushed into the sea. Some people might think it's a good thing, but I don't think it's a good thing, and I've got certain it's not going to happen. They're going to stick on there in some way or another, unless there's a negotiated peace. That's going to happen. But I think that what may come out of this great debate is that they will somehow arrive at some kind of acceptable compromise from their own point of view. There may not ever be negotiations. In that case, they're not going to clear out altogether. I think if they did clear out altogether, actually throw up the sponge and drew the troops like that, just nothing, without anything else, and they were more or less kicked out, I think it would have a deplorable impression and might have a great, unfortunate effect on American public opinion in regard to troops in Germany.
Final question to all of you, and come back to the theme with which we started about the position of America today and America's future. Could you answer this? How worried are you about America's future? One American commentator said the other day that the racial conflict threatens to turn the American dream into a nightmare, and we have the terrible problem of Vietnam, which they are trying to cope with now. How worried are you about the future of America as the leading power in the free world, on whose protection we depend? Lord Gladwin.
Well, I think the Americans will come through this crisis somehow or other. I think they got enormous vitality. It's a great thing about the Americans. And the great thing about them, too, is if something doesn't work, they try something else.
The great problem, I believe, for the United States is to prevent their relations with the developing countries, countries with colored people in, reaching the state of the relations of the white Americans with the Negroes inside the United States. And the way to do that, I'm sure, is to apply their enormous technology, their power, their know-how, their friendliness, to contacting and helping the developing world, and not, in my view, looking after their military defense, internal or external. And I believe, my final sentence is, that the Americans are so resourceful and so free that they'll find a way out.
Lord Gladwin, Mr. Enoch Powell, Christopher Mayhew, thank you very much. Gentlemen, may I interpret your view generally on this subject as critical but hopeful?